today has some new meaning because, as you may have read in the papers this past week, the government is now really sort of targeting real estate and saying that it is a real problem across the country of money laundering by buying real estate. And so, as usual, they try to blame realtors about it, but really, this is a issue that faces lawyers and bankers and everybody who touches a real estate deal. But because of that, it's important that we understand how to conduct ourselves so that, you know, you're not blamed for any of these problems. So that's one of the subjects I'm going to talk about. Ilana asked me to mention that I will talk at the end of the seminar about some recent updates in the law, including residential tenancies and cannabis. There is a cannabis seminar for the brokerage on April 30th. I'm going to come back. And that's the day we have to file our tax return. So you might be in the mood for some cannabis on April 30th. So you may want to just come and chill out at the office on April 30th. It'll help you deal with all that stress of filing your tax returns this year. Okay, and so one of the nice things, I always like coming to this office because my office is only 10 minutes away. I'm at 400 and Major Mackenzie, so it's easy for me to drive here. And really, for all of those of you who've sent a deal to our office, that's really the main advantage is we're here. And so I've written books, as you know, I've been on television. Last week I was on Steve Paikin, The Agenda, talking about how landlords, with a claim that landlords do not properly fix up buildings, so tenants are living with cockroaches. That was the subject, and I was representing the landlord, and they had Kristen Wong representing the tenant. She's the Toronto councillor with a tenant rights activist, but I thought I held my own pretty well representing the landlords. I've written columns in the Toronto Star and Real Estate magazine, and I'm with real estate lawyers. You see our building as you head north on the west side of the 400. These are the books. I've got a brand new landlord guide in case anybody is interested at the end. And just very quickly about our firm. If you've done a deal with our firm, you know that the main difference is you see our cars driving around. We sign up 95% of our clients at home. It doesn't matter where they live, Toronto, downtown, Vaughan, Scarborough, Kitchener, Cambridge, Hamilton, Niagara, London, Muskoka. We go to their house and sign the papers. So the client doesn't have to miss work. And that is the number one advantage for our firm, and yet our fees are the same as everybody else because we know we have to be very competitive. We also have a trust account at every bank, so the clients never have to bring a bank draft to our office to close a deal. All they have to do is go to the bank where they bank, and they can do a transfer from their account to my account. It takes 5 minutes, and the money's in our account to close the deal. It's a much more sensible solution. We also deposit your commission by EFT so that you never have to come to my office, even though it's closed, to pick up a check. And if the deal closes today at 11 a.m., the agent is notified at 11:01 that the deal has closed automatically. Agents always love that, and they constantly tell me how much they appreciate that. We have 35 offices so that buyers can go pick up the keys, and I'm available always to answer questions. And so any questions you have on an offer, residential disclosure, any kind of issue, you just send me an email. You have it there. I don't charge for it. I'm happy to do that service for this brokerage. Okay, so now we're going to go to Fintrac. Does this matter? So I'm going to try to make it simple. If lenders are suspicious, deals don't close. I want your deals to close. Trust me, lenders can review a deal right up to the minute of closing. And in general, A lenders don't cancel deals. However, B lenders, and this is not a fault in any way, but they review things right up to the last minute, and I have had emails at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they just say, deal canceled. No reason, deal canceled. And then it means I have to get an extension, client has to go refinance someplace else, and it's a real disaster. And then you don't get paid, and that's the biggest thing. You don't get paid when these things happen. And so the main way to avoid this is know your clients. This is lesson number one you need to take from Fintrac. What do I mean by know your clients? It means know how they're connected to the community. When a client is connected to the community, they're not committing suspicious acts. Simple as that. They're not committing suspicious acts. And as you know from your coaching sessions, that your client base is your source of referrals. This is how you make money. And so the more you know your client, the better it's going to be for you, because you're going to get more business and referrals from those clients. And at the same time, you're going to stay out of trouble with Fintrac. So, on every deal, when you have a connection with somebody new who you do not know, there's two questions you have to always be thinking about. How did you find me? That's number one. How did they find you? And the second question is, where is the money coming from to close this deal? You have to be asking this on every deal. Why is how did you find me important? Because within 10 seconds, you should be able to place this person. Oh, you did a deal for my cousin last year at such and such a street. Or my kid plays hockey with the family of this, and they told me about you. Within 10 seconds, you can say, oh, I can place this person. If you can place this person, Fintrac is solved 90% of the time. But if you don't know this person, I saw your sign. I saw something on the internet. Do you understand? It has to raise a question mark, which is, how did they find me? Okay, that is a little bit more tricky. So you see, this is why you have to always ask, how did you find me? And where is the money coming from is really a simple question. Does this person have a job that can explain their down payment that makes sense? In other words, do they have the down payment? Because you got to qualify them for a mortgage anyways. And so these are the two questions Fintrac wants you to know. Where? Well, that's the main thing for Fintrac. Where is the money coming from? It's a simple question. Where? And we'll come back to it. So, if you know the buyer, you place them. You don't have to worry about them. But lots of times, you're going to get calls from people you don't know. I saw your sign. Okay, you don't know this person. So to save yourself all aggravation and wasting a day with people who are not qualified to buy, then my advice is, and it comes from one of my books, Real Estate Salespeople Beware, you send them a short email first. And you say, I'm going to ask you 5 questions, 6 questions. Just answer the questions and I'll set up some showings for you tomorrow. This is for any new buyer. Okay, so let's go through the questions. Have you signed an agreement with another realtor? Okay, so right away, you're protecting yourself. You've heard of too many cases where buyers sign BRAs with 2 brokerages and you end up in tread with somebody else in an arbitration. Here you have an answer before you even meet the person. They haven't signed with anybody else. This wins any arbitration. So for that alone, it's worth it to get that question answered. The second question is, can you please tell me where you work in the area? Now this is not personal, and yet this solves Fintrac. The number one thing Fintrac auditors look at is the occupation, because the occupation tells them that this person is connected to the community and they're not trying to launder money. So you see, you're doing 2 things. You're solving Fintrac. You're getting the occupation before you meet the person. But at the same time, it's answering the question, oh, they have a job, they're going to qualify for a mortgage, they can buy a property. So you see, these 2 questions should be asked every time. The next one is, what are you looking for? What area and the price range? And this is so you can do a CMA for this person. You can all do a CMA for a seller, but this way you can do a CMA for a buyer before they even come to see you in the morning. And the final question is, do you own a home? Because that makes the prospect a lot more valuable to you. So, if the buyer says, nobody makes me do this, I don't have time, cancel the showings. They're wasting your time. How many of you think this is a good idea to just do this? So I recommend, even if you started today, you have this material, just use it and just send this out. And trust me, Very successful buyer agents have told me that when a client doesn't have 5 minutes to do this, they cancel the showings because they don't want to waste a day with somebody who's not serious. So trust me, this is a great way to learn about somebody, and you're solving all these problems at the same time. Okay, so now let's go back to coaching. Okay, so what do your coaches tell you? They tell you that your database is your most important asset. How many of you have a database of clients? How many of you call your clients at least once every 6 months? How many of you wish you contacted your clients once every 6 months? See, the point is, when you contact your clients, many times you pick up business right on the phone. You call them up and it's like, oh, yeah, I couldn't find your card, my nephew's buying a house. Like there's business you're missing by not calling your clients. So you should be doing this anyways. And when you contact your clients, one of the things you always should be asking is, so what are you doing now? What are you doing? You still at the same job? Oh, you got a promotion. What happened? What does that mean if they got a promotion? They can afford more money. Maybe they can buy another property. Maybe they can move up. You know, the market's a little soft right now. You know, even though you may not get as much money for your house, if you're thinking of moving up, this is the perfect time to move up. You understand? So it's easy just by doing this. You're following up and maybe getting some business, but you're doing more. Because you're not only building a relationship, this is what the coaches tell you, you're also monitoring. You see, one of the biggest things about Fintrac is when people are doing multiple deals, they call that a business relationship. They say you should be monitoring, but they don't tell you what you need to do to monitor. Like, is this a detective story? You gotta run around with binoculars and start looking at people? Of course not. What it means is, you got to ask more questions, but really, what you already did. How can they afford a second or a third property? They got a raise, they got a different promotion. You understand? And so, by just following up with people, you're satisfying everything you need to do for Fintrac. You're building your relationship, you're knowing your clients, and you're monitoring them, even though you don't even know you're monitoring them. So really, if I just finished now and you left, and that's all you did, was just know your clients, know how they're connected, get their occupation, and follow up once a year, that's enough. You've already learned enough for Fintrac, but we're going to go through a lot more this morning. So, as you know, the goals of Fintrac are to stop money laundering, and many of you think, oh, because our brokerage does not accept cash deposits, we don't have to worry about money laundering. Unfortunately, there are a lot of other examples that could be money laundering. I mean, the government focused on corporations in the articles. We'll get to corporations. But something as simple as a guy puts a $25,000, $50,000 deposit on a house up here, and they put a home inspection. The money goes into your brokerage trust account. It's a bank draft. And then they cancel the deal 4 days later. Now, the brokerage is not going to issue a check until the bank draft clears. You know, they're going to wait till the bank draft clears. That's not what this is about. That's money laundering, what I just described. They put money in, we don't know where it came from, and it comes out through the brokerage by way of a certified funds or check or bank draft from the brokerage. The government considers that an example of money laundering. You wouldn't consider that. But you can see there's lots of situations that could apply to real estate that happen every day that the government could see as money laundering. So that's why it's wrong to say, oh, we don't accept cash, so we're not involved in money laundering at all. And that's what it is, because the biggest problem with Fintrac today, frankly, is the bank draft. That is. It is. How many of you have 80, 90% of your deals, deposits are done by bank draft today? How many of you have 80, 90%? How many get a certified check? Banks are very rare to even allow a certified check anymore. Certified checks were great. You know why? They had the name on the check, they had the bank account number, they had everything. They had everything that Fintrac wanted. What does a bank draft have on it? Nothing. Do you understand? And that's why bank drafts are one of the biggest sources of potential money laundering because we don't know where the money came from. We don't know who gave that money. Could have been cash, taken to a bank, converted into money, into a deposit. Nobody knows where that money came from. So you see, you get a bank draft on every deal. That's potential money laundering right there. This is why you have to understand and ask the right questions when you receive that bank draft. And we're going to come to that when we do the receipt of funds, because we're going to go through the receipt of funds very carefully in the law. So I want you to understand the government doesn't make you a detective, but they have certain rules that they want you to follow. And the main rule is this: to properly identify the client in front of you with picture ID. That's it. They want to make sure that you know who you're talking to in front of them. And if somebody doesn't have a driver's license or a passport or a permanent residence card with their picture on it, to me, that's suspicious. Because nobody leaves the house without picture ID. And so if they don't have it, right away, that's suspicious. But that's all the government's asking you to do. One piece of picture ID. And that's it. You're not a detective. You're not following around with binoculars. Just a tip. If you have an overseas client who's here to look at houses, Fintrac them right away. Even if they're not putting in an offer, because many of these people will go back home and then call you and say, you know that condo I saw, I want to sign it. Send me DocuSign. Now you have nothing. And then they say, oh, I'll send you something by fax, or I'll email you ID. It's not good enough. Fintrac them while they're here. Keep it in the file. Just tell them, I have to do this in case you want to buy something later. That solves your problem. Because that's what the government is making sure. They want people identified in person here. Okay, and multiple deposits. So lots of times people may get 2 bank drafts for a deposit from different banks. That is clearly an example of money laundering. Now there could be a good explanation for this. I had 2 lawyers, a husband and wife, signing papers with me 3 days before closing. And the husband got a call while we were signing, and he looked at this phone and he said, I'm really sorry, Mark, it's my mortgage broker. Can I pick up the phone? I said, sure. He's talking to the mortgage broker, he's very upset. He gets off the phone, he says, we gave the deposit of $30,000 from 3 separate bank accounts because we cashed our RSPs on one, we had a deposit in another, and a checking account. Because we had 3 bank drafts, they flagged it as suspicious. And you know what I said to them? I said, be happy, you have 3 days till closing. You could fix this. They could have done this at 3 o'clock on the day of closing and you would not close. You wouldn't get your money, and then we would have to ask for an extension. So you're lucky this came out early. So there's another example. They had a good explanation, but you have to have that good explanation, because as far as the bank's concerned, that's an example of money laundering. Okay, and whenever you have anything suspicious at any time, you go see Alana. You just pick up the phone. I'm not saying cancel the deal. God forbid. I'm not there to cancel the deal. I'll tell you how to close the deal. I want you to get paid. But you have to go whenever it's suspicious. And Alana made a point to me this morning. She said, you know, Mark, I reported about half a dozen deals last year. The government did nothing. That's okay. They do nothing 95% of the time. But it's better for the brokerage that you report it, because when you report, it means you care about Fintrac. And remember, it's anonymous. The government does nothing. Okay, I had one agent who said to me, Mark, if I had to report every suspicious transaction, I'd have to go into witness protection. And so, because of my clientele. And so, okay, I get it. I can't tell you how to deal with that, but presumably most of your people, you know, they're community people, they're buying and selling houses this year, and that's how you deal with them. Okay, so as you know, the form has sections C and D. And they have to, in my opinion, both of these sections should be completed on every deal. C is about risk. So you see, there's a box in C that says you've identified the client in person. To me, if you've identified the client in person with picture ID, that's all that Fintrac is asking of you. You can then write in low risk for number C. That's enough, because that's all they're asking you to do, is identify the person. But then we come to D, which is business relationship. So the definition of a business relationship means that this client has done 2 deals with this brokerage, not with you personally, but this brokerage in the last 5 years. And so the question is, how do you verify this? And so I don't know that this brokerage has a perfect system, so that when a new client comes in, they type it into the database and it pops up, oh, this person did a deal in the last 5 years. Lone Wolf Software may do this, but most brokerages tell me it's not perfect. And so my advice is you should always fill out section D. So this is what you should do with section D. You say to the client, is this your first deal with our brokerage, or have you done another deal in the last 5 years? If the client says this is our first deal, you should write that into section D. First deal with brokerage. Simple. First deal, that means you ask the question and you got an easy answer, first deal with brokerage. If they tell you, no, it's my second deal, it's my third deal in the last 5 years, okay, there has to be an explanation in section D. That's all. Remember, I gave the explanation of that couple, 2 lawyers who had 3 bank drafts. They have an explanation. They cashed their RSPs. They had an explanation. That's all this is. Does the explanation make sense? And the easiest explanation, we're selling our house to buy another one. Okay? It's our second deal because we're selling our house we bought and buying another one. That is a perfectly good explanation, and all you do is write it in section D. So to me, everyone should be completing section D. That's what you write. First deal or second deal, explanation. It's as simple as that. So here are the questions then that you're going to ask somebody. Where's the money coming from? So whenever somebody's doing 2 or 3 deals, okay, you really should be saying, well, how are you affording the additional down payment? Oh, I got a raise. I changed jobs. My parents are helping me out. This is, again, a good chance to ask, where is the money coming from? And here are some answers that make it really easy. We're refinancing to buy a second property. A lot of people bought properties, they've gone up in value, now they can refinance, take some money up, and buy an income property to help them plan for the future. That's a perfectly good explanation. Or, we got a gift from parents. Parents are giving us a gift to buy a property. So you see, you're still answering the question, how can this person afford to do a multiple deal? That's all the government asks. Is there an explanation? When the person says to you, I'm unemployed, this is my 5th property I'm buying in the last 3 years, well, it's a little bit suspicious. Where is the money coming from? Do you understand? And so that's why you just ask for an explanation, you write it down. It's as simple as that. That's all the government asks for. They want to make sure that you understand where the money is coming from. Now, other examples of money laundering are people who flip properties. They buy bungalows, they rebuild them with cash, and then they sell them quickly. And so they cover all the cash they put into the property, they pay tradespeople in cash, so it's a favor. So anybody who's in the quick flip business could be a suspicious deal, especially those who buy these houses and sell them without registering with Ontario. This is a real problem when you buy a house that's new, but it's not Ontario, because the builder is pretending to have moved in and they're selling it as a resale. They're going to have HST issues, they're going to have other issues, but for the buyer, they're buying a house without a Ontario warranty. And so usually these sellers have no personal liability. If you don't hold back some money for a warranty, if anything goes wrong, the buyer is out of luck. You got to be very careful when you act for buyers of these houses, because they're going to blame you when things go wrong with the house. Okay. And so that is the key to Section D for David. Is this your first deal? If not, what's the reason? You have to do that every time you sign something. Okay, the compliance office here is Alana, who does a wonderful job. She's familiar with everything. If you ever have a question, call her. She calls me if she can't answer it, but she doesn't have to call me that many times because she's pretty good at this. And so all of you have the folder that you got today. I would ask you to all just sign it and give it to Ilana, just confirming that you've read the company compliance policy and that you've been here today. And so this way the brokerage has a record that all of you are here today, you've read the Fintrac compliance policy. And it's inside the handout that I gave. So here are some policies that really are common sense, but that the brokerage should be following. So number one, no cash deposits. It's as simple as that. 2, photo ID. How many of you take a picture of the ID when you're identifying a client? How many of you don't? You just write down the information. Hands up. Okay, it's not illegal to do writing down. Some clients won't let you take a picture. Pictures are better because you're less likely to make a mistake. When you write down, it's easy to make a mistake on the expiry date or the number. And so it's important, to me, if possible, take a picture, print it, put it in the file, delete it from your phone. That's really what you should do, where possible, but it's not illegal to just write down the information. Just please make sure that the expiry date is past closing. So if they have a passport, but it expires before closing, it will not be good enough for the bank. Same with a driver's license, if it expires before closing. The good news now is that you can go to Service Ontario pretty much within 48 hours, get something from them. Some type of identity card that could satisfy Fintrac as well. I've had to send people before closing to Service Ontario to get this when they tell me we don't have everything, it's packed up. It's packed up in boxes, we don't know where it is. And they are signing papers, and I say, well, I'm sorry. I have to do this too. Go to Service Ontario at 8:30, they'll give you something, bring it in when we come to, have it available when we send our person to sign it. Okay. Is this a policy here? No commission unless Fintrac stuff filed. Yes or no? Yes. Okay, just so you know, I had a broker call me. And what happened was the deal closed and the listing agent did not Fintrac the seller. So they said, we're not paying you commission. So the listing agent went to the seller and said, I'm very sorry, but I forgot to fill out this form with you. I need your ID. You know what the seller said to him? Cut the commission by 1% and I'll give you my ID. That wasn't funny for this brokerage. My question is, how did the seller even know about this? Now, when the broker called me, I said, call the seller lawyer and tell him to give you the ID. Just tell him to tell you that he identified the seller. And if the lawyer wouldn't do that, I said, don't use that lawyer anymore, because that's an easy way to resolve this. A lot of people may be afraid to give you ID because of identity theft. It happens. So the simple answer is, it's okay, I'll get the lawyer to do it for you, and the lawyer will tell me, you know, and as lawyers, they must give it to us because the bank requires it, you know, Law Society rules require it. So they're going to give us the ID. I don't know why they're afraid to show it to you. However, that's what you do. Now, one way to ease into this when you meet with a buyer especially is to say something like this. You know, we're in the golden horseshoe here. And if you're not a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, you have to pay 15% extra tax. So could you please show me your passport or permanent residence card because I want to make sure it hasn't expired and you're entitled to the 15% reduction. Isn't that a nice way to ask for Fintrac? You're trying to protect. Do you understand? That's how you should ask. Just tell them, I want to make sure that you qualify. So just so you understand that, if somebody's a Canadian citizen and they live in another country overseas, they do not pay the 15% tax. They do not pay. It's only if they're not a Canadian citizen or not a permanent resident, then they have to pay the 15% tax. There are ways they can get it back, but they got to pay it on closing, that 50%. So that's a nice way to remember to ask for Fintrac. Again, business transactions, to me, you should always ask if the client has done a deal in the last 5 years. I really stress that. Fill out every section on the form properly. And at any time, if you're a little bit afraid of something being suspicious, then go speak to Alana. It could happen a little later. Well, you know, so some of my money's coming from overseas. How do I get it? You know, as soon as you start hearing stuff like this, just go to Alana. I'm not saying don't act. Just go to Alana, talk about it, see if you have to compile a report. Okay, so you're supposed to look at original photo ID, passports, PR cards, driver's licenses. People ask me about the health card. The health card has a picture. The problem with the health card is how many of you still have the old red and white health cards? Okay, what is there about the red and white health card? It's still good, isn't it? But what's not on that red and white health card? There's no picture. That's why they don't allow health cards, because people can have health cards without pictures. And so until that's fixed, health cards are no good. Okay, so if you are writing it down, make sure you write down everything correctly. So write down the number and the expiry date, especially the expiry date. When they come to do audits, they actually type in the driver's license numbers right into the system. And if it doesn't pop up on the provincial system, they knock or fine the brokerage over it. So that's why I'm saying be very careful. If possible, take a picture, because when you take a picture, you can't make a mistake about the numbers. Okay, so there was always the problem with the elderly sellers. So elderly sellers have expired passports. They can't have a driver's license because they're a menace. And so as a result, the government tried to help us in the middle of 2017. So they said, if you don't have a picture ID, then as long as you have one document that shows the name and address, plus one document that shows the name and birth date together, or a third document that can help would be a void check or canceled check. The problem is no elderly seller is going to give you a canceled check, but it's possible. So if you have two of these documents, it's enough. So what would work? A utility bill, a gas bill. So a gas bill shows the name of the seller and the address. That actually works as one legitimate piece of ID. If there's no picture, you just take a picture of the gas bill. A good reason to look at a gas bill always at a listing anyways is so you see if there are any additional charges. The seller may not remember that the furnace is on payments or the water softener is on payments, but it'll show up in the gas bill so you don't have a problem on closings for that reason alone. Now, with that, you could use a birth certificate or a marriage certificate because that would have the client's name and the birth date. So if you had those two documents, that would work. But I remind you again, elderly people are allowed to go get an identity card. To me, an agent told me once he did that with a client. He went to get an identity card for an elderly seller. He sat with her for 2 hours in Service Ontario. He got something. He got the ID, and then he got 5 deals from the family. They were so impressed that he had the patience to take their mother for an identity card that they all sent their business to him. So think about that. An elderly seller can get an identity card, and they love it. They have this official document with their picture on it. They're thrilled. And that solves Fintrac as well. Okay. So now we come to the receipt of funds. So the receipt of funds is the most important because that answers the question, where is the money coming from? So you're also supposed to answer where is the money going to, but 99% of the time it's going to the listing brokerage. That's all you have to put, listing brokerage. The listing brokerage is not going to give you their trust account number. It doesn't matter as long as you put listing brokerage. Okay, so here's the problem. Because according to Fintrac, you're supposed to get the bank account information for the person making the deposit, which means you're supposed to be asking for a certified check. And a certified check would be the best way to comply with Fintrac. The problem is most banks are not giving a certified check today. That's the problem. So Fintrac says if you do get a bank draft, you're still supposed to put the bank account information on the form, which means now you could ask for a canceled check. Same thing. From the buyer, I need a canceled check from your account or a void check that shows where the money came from. And if the client gives that to you, you just include that in the form or you attach it to the form. Some brokerages say, I need you to get something from the bank that has your account information. You can get that from the bank, something that has somebody's account information, because some people don't have checks. They just work on the internet, they pay bills that way. That would work as well. However, you have to remember the client does not have to provide this to you. They can just say, no, we're afraid of identity theft, we have privacy concerns, so now what do you do? So, this is how you deal with it. First, you ask for the account information. Is it possible for you to give me a void check? If they say no, then say, please confirm the money came from your account. Tell me, did you get this bank draft from your bank account? And the buyer says yes. And that's it. You write on the form, buyer confirms deposit came from their account. The buyer doesn't sign this. You fill it out. But that's what you do. Buyer confirms money came from their account. I asked that to a Fintrac representative when they spoke in front of the TREB brokerages, and all the brokerages were screaming at them when they were saying you had to get the proper account from the bank. The brokers were screaming at them, saying, do you understand the real world? They don't provide this. But the point was, when I asked the government, is this okay? They did not say it's not okay. And so to me, this is what you do. They'll never penalize the firm if this is what you say on the receipt of funds record. And it doesn't make the deal suspicious either. So this is what you do. Now, if they give you the bank information, great. There is a large brokerage that has a policy that every buyer must give the bank account information. They will not do the deal unless the buyer gives that information. And so that's their policy. It's not a bad policy, but a buyer could refuse. Even there, it could refuse. But you see, that brokerage is just trying to make sure. Now, how many of you take people to builders' offices to make offers? How many of you take people to builders' showrooms to do pre-construction offers? Any of you?
Yes.
Any of you do that? Okay. Now, when you do that, you don't have to complete a receipt of funds because they're paying the money to a builder or the builder lawyer most of the time. What do the builders ask for in the sales office? Think about it. You're there. What do they ask for? You're walking in with a client. What do they ask for? What do they want from the client? What kind of ID they ask for? They ask for a picture ID. What else do they ask for? Think about the offer. What are they asking for in the showroom? I can't hear you. Post-dated checks. Now you understand why. What do those post-dated checks show? The person has a Canadian bank account and they got all the information on there. That's why they do it that way. Post-dated checks. So you have an accountant. Simple as that. Everybody has to comply with Fintrac. That's why they do it that way. That's what you should be thinking about as well, if possible. And that's the most important thing to remember about the receipt of funds program. Either you get a canceled check, void check, or you write in, client confirms money came from their account on every one of these. And really, the deal secretary should be watching for this. This is how you should complete that form. Okay, you're supposed to do everybody in person. Okay, and so how many of you here act for overseas clients? It's not illegal. How many of you act for overseas clients? Okay, so if you don't do many, that's good. Because you see, with overseas clients, it's a problem. My advice is if somebody's in another country, get a lawyer in the other country to identify them for you. So you're allowed to use people in other countries. They call them mandataries. You could use another brokerage company, in my opinion. Because I have the same challenges. I always insist on a lawyer or notary to do the identification. So whenever I speak to a client, buying or selling, it doesn't matter. I'm going to ask them, are you going to be here a week before closing to sign the papers? You know, because that's typically when we send somebody to their house a week before closing. If the client says yes, fine. But the client could say, no, I'm leaving town in a week, so I'm not going to be here for closing. Can you do a power of attorney for me? By the way, powers of attorneys are disasters. So I say to them, you're going to be here for a week? Yes. Why don't you sign the papers while you're here? I'll send somebody to your house tomorrow. Then you can go and we'll close the deal. They said, I can do that? You can do that. So that saves me the trouble. But let's say I have a client who says, I'm calling you from England. I'm selling a property, I'm buying a property. Will you be here to sign the papers? No. Okay, you can still close the deal. But I need you to go to a lawyer or a notary in the city you're in, and then I need to have proof this person is a lawyer, and then I'll send the lawyer all the papers. They'll identify for me, they'll witness the signatures, and they'll email back, and I'll close the deal. So that's how I do it. You see, I can't do it by Skype. I cannot sign somebody up by Skype by saying, oh, that's you, show me your ID, sign, I'm witnessing it. It's not legal. Can't do that. Has to be in person. So when they're here in Ontario, I will send somebody to them. But I'm not going to go to the United States, Europe, etc. So trust me, use a lawyer or a notary, because right away that reduces the risk of it being suspicious. That as a brokerage, you took precaution with every client who was not here to identify in person. You made sure it was a lawyer or notary who did the identification. So to me, that would be how you would do that. Use a lawyer, always, whenever you can. So let's say the parents are given the deposit. There's nothing illegal about the parents giving the deposit. Just show it, that deposit coming from parents, and just put the name and address of the parents. It's not illegal for the kids to buy a house and to say the deposit came from the parents. It's okay. It's not illegal. Just write it down. Deposit came from parents. It's okay. Occupation. This is the #1 thing for the government. That's why I told you to send a little email out. But the more information, the better. And to me, you know, the government has given guidelines. So if you said doctor, teacher, lawyer, engineer, these are pretty good, but I don't know why you wouldn't put where they work. Most people are very proud of where they work, their careers. That's how you know, make a bond with people. So you really should be asking about this. You know, I'm in accounting. You know, where? The business, the company, you know, etc. I get, so sales, self-employed, small business owner, these are not good enough for the government. It doesn't demonstrate enough. So you really want to put more into the occupation, because that really says what? That my buyer is connected to the community. That's what you want. You want to be able to prove this person works in the community, they're connected here, they're not suspicious. So I'm asked this question, what if they are retired? Put what they did before. Most people are proud of what they did. I'm a retired school teacher with the school Peel Board for the last 30 years. People are proud of that. Put it down, you know, talk a little bit about their career. That's how you deal with occupation. The same way I cannot identify with Skype, you cannot identify with Skype. You must use a lawyer if you're not there. So that's what I always insist on. If it's another province in Canada, and you could likely use a real estate brokerage to be that person for you. They know the rules of identification if it's another province in Canada, but if it's overseas, and in certain countries, unfortunately, nothing works. So when they tell you from certain countries that we've associated as terrorist countries, well, that's not going to work. And I usually hang up the phone when you get a call like that. And so, you know, if it smells bad, just hang up the phone right away. And the reason is, you don't want to ever get connected to a thief, even if you are innocent. Because even if you are innocent, you're going to be in the article. This person defrauded all these people, money laundered, and the realtor in question, John Smith, said, I didn't know anything about this person. Well, P.S., every time they Google your name, what shows up first? Fraud. And they don't know anything, whether it's, I remember, like, I know there've been in the newspaper again, the Sherman murders. Do you remember the Sherman murders? They've now, interesting, they had to tear down their house now on Old Colony because of the stigma of the murder. Nobody would buy that house. How many of you think there'll still be a stigma, even if they build a new house on that property? Probably be a stigma. And so I remember when they were killed, I was in Florida, and the papers were writing articles every day about this. And so looking for an angle, looking for a story. So I got a call walking down the street in Florida from a reporter from the Globe and Mail. And she calls me to say, hello. I said, yeah. And she said, I did a search of title of the property in Forest Hill that they bought, because they were selling the house on Colony to move into this, they were going to renovate and move into this property in Forest Hill. That was their plan. So I said, okay. And I noticed on the deed, it just said $1 that they paid. Is there anything unusual about that? So I said, I don't have the papers in front of me. I said, do you have a copy of the deed? And she said, yes, I do. I said, turn to page 3, which is under land transfer tax. I'll bet you it says something like tax paid in advance in one of the headings. And she said, oh yeah, it says tax paid in advance. What does that mean? So I said, people, especially if it's a private sale and they don't want anybody to know how much they paid for the property, they can go to the Minister of Finance and prepay the land transfer tax. And all that's going to show on title is $1. And I have done that for many buyers. You see, if you go on MLS, it doesn't pay because the price stays on MLS. You can't hide the property price from MLS. But if it's a private sale, which this was, or an exclusive, whatever it was, you can keep the property on MLS. So the reporter says to me, why would somebody do that? And my answer was, so somebody like you can't go find out what they paid for the property. That's what I said. I said to her, I thought it was funny. So P.S., she wrote about it the next day. In the paper, in the Globe and Mail. It said, Sherman House, Forest Hill, only $1. Lawyer Mark Weisletter said, people do this to stop others from finding out what they pay. That's what she put in the paper. So I thought, oh, okay. I'm sitting in a restaurant in Florida. Somebody comes up to me, Mark, how are you? I read about you, connected to the Sherman murders. You understand? They Googled Sherman murders, and this article, and my name shows up. Nobody knows anything. I might as well have killed them. My name is there in the article. So anyways, but there's the lesson why you don't want to get any way connected to bad people. And this is why you have to ask these questions. You don't want to be connected to a bad buyer because it follows you forever on social media. Okay, you know, I laughed on October 17th when they announced, you know, cannabis is legal. They showed these 10 kids in college all lighting up, smoking, all stoned out of their minds, and they showed them all laughing. And I looked at that picture and I said, none of you is ever getting an apartment for the rest of your life. You know, you stupid idiots. Everybody's going to check you out on social media, and when they see you smoking up, you think they're going to say, oh, there's a good tenant for me. You'll never get a place. And that's the problem for people who are too out there on social media. You know, they'll find you. That's, by the way, how you check if a tenant has pets. Facebook, Instagram. Trust me, if they got a pet, hey, look at me, my pet. Good, out. Okay, that's how you find out if a tenant has a pet. Okay, so Section B. Section B is a very important section because what does Section B say? Are you doing the deal for somebody else? Simple as that, right? That is suspicious. You're here, you don't really have any money, you're doing the deal for a crook. Now, you're not a detective, you just have to ask the question. Are you doing this deal for somebody else? No, you put no. If they say yes, well, that's suspicious right away. Because you're going to have to find out who they're doing the deal for, and you'll have to identify them. This is something I have to ask every buyer as well. Because I have to put this right on title. When every deal that closes, I have to ask the buyer, are you buying this property for yourself or for somebody else? And they have to sign in front of me that they're buying it for themselves. So lawyers, we have to do this too. And you have to do it. And so it's pretty simple. Now that you look at the form, where did the deposit come from? Your account or somebody else's? Are you doing the deal for somebody else? Yes or no? You see, that's why you complete all the boxes on this form correctly, you got no Fintrac problems. Because you're asking the right questions. Okay, so now we come to companies. And this was identified this week as a very significant way that people are laundering money in Canada. How many of you see offers come in the name of a numbered company? Okay, so you see a numbered company is putting in a deposit. We have no clue who owns or controls this company. Lots of times the name on the company could be anybody, and that money is not traced. Usually these companies have no mortgage that they're doing. They're just bringing in money to a lawyer, and then they're flipping it afterwards, and nobody knows anything about the company. So this has been identified, not just Toronto, but across Canada as the #1 way, and the government, or the article said, nameless, faceless corporations. Okay, so I have to deal with this, you have to deal with this. You're not a detective, so how do you deal with this? Okay, so the #1 thing you have to make sure of when you're hired to act for these people is who can sign for the company. Who can sign? Because if you don't get the right signing person, you're not going to get paid commission. So you have to have the right person, so where do you find this? Now, a lot of people will have the articles of incorporation. And if they have the articles of incorporation with the directors' names, and one of the persons signing in front of you is a director, 99 times out of 100, that's enough. But if they don't have the articles, you should ask for a recent tax assessment, you know, a reassessment, because it'll have their company name and a person on it to demonstrate that that person has authority. So the key is, do you have the right person who signs, and have you personally identified that director? That's your job. Now, you're not finished your job, because they also say, where's the address? See, that's a problem with these corporations. Now, a lot of these corporations have lawyers' offices as addresses. That's not illegal, just write it down. Just write it down, the address. It'll be on the articles, what the address is. Could be somebody's house, doesn't matter. Write down the address of the corporation. Next, you need to put down the names and addresses of every other director. So if there's 2 directors on the articles, then you need to put down the name and address of the second director. You don't need to identify that person, but you have to put down their name and address. And then you also have to ask, who owns the shares of this company? Because that's the big problem with money laundering. We don't know who owns the shares. You're not a detective. You just have to ask, do you own all the shares? You're talking to somebody. If he says, I own all the shares, or she says, I own all the shares, that's enough. Sole shareholder. But let's say he says, no, the other director also owns 50% of the shares. So you write down the name of the other director, shareholder, and the address. That's what you have to do. You have to account for every other director, and you have to ask about every other shareholder. Now, the government could be worried about this because for other reasons too. So as an example, a lot of people who are not residents, they're not permanent residents, they always call me and say, what if we set up this Canadian company? Then we can buy it without paying the 15% tax. Do you understand? 15% tax. So I say, well, who's the director of this company? And who are the shareholders? Well, we're the shareholders. Oh, non-residents, you're the shareholders. Yes. Well, that's a foreign company. You got to pay the 15% tax. So you see, as a lawyer, I have to ask these questions because I'm not going to let them close a deal with me if they're not. And most lawyers will check this information. You're not a detective, and the fact is, most of these people will not even have an up-to-date minute book. Only from a minute book could you actually see who the officers are and who can sign. Now, going forward, you might want to ask the lawyer to confirm to you that this person is the signing officer with the right to sign, and that the information they gave you about shareholders is true. Because the lawyer has that information. If I'm acting for this company, I'm going to have to pass resolutions approving this deal. And so the directors are going to have to sign. The shareholders are going to have to sign. So unfortunately, that may be down the road. Wherever you get this and you don't feel you have a good answer, just call the lawyer, because they're going to have this information and that can help you. So for the time being, you have to do this. Personally identify the person who's signing for the company, have the articles, list the director's name and addresses, ask the question, and just say, Klein said they're the sole shareholder. If they say that, it's enough. Klein said they're the sole shareholder. It's enough.
Mark, I just want to touch base on the corporations a little bit, because I know that it's typical, as you know, with commercial deals, that sometimes they will assign it to a corporation prior to closing. So, I mean, I know the answer, but I want you to kind of explain to the agents what the proper procedure would be in such a case as far as identification.
Well, if you have the main person identified, and then they want to assign it before closing, the best thing would be to let the lawyers deal with it. Really, that would be the best thing, for the lawyers to deal with it, because the minute they come to you and say, we need to assign it to somebody, then you have to ask the same question. Who's the director of the corporation? We need to identify, and we have to ask the question, who are the other directors, and does anybody own more shares? So it's the same path you follow, but it could be easier to just say, do it with the lawyers, you know, and let the lawyers do it, and it would be enough. So where you could leave it with the lawyers, better. Doesn't mean it's suspicious. They had the right to assign in the agreement. But if they ask you to do it and you're preparing the amendment to do that, then identify the corporation. Exactly the same way as I've just given you. And again, it's not perfect, but this will satisfy over 90% of the time any inquiry by CRA. Okay, powers of attorney. The only time you should really be using a power of attorney is if you have an elderly seller who's already got Alzheimer's, they're in a home, they can't sign papers. So hopefully, when they were younger, they prepared a power of attorney that said, if something happens to me, my spouse or my child can sign papers. And that would be a legitimate use of a power of attorney. Sometimes you have a spouse who's leaving town and they say, well, I'm not going to be here, I'm traveling, so I want to appoint my spouse as my power of attorney to sign the paper. It's not illegal, but it would still be better if possible to always have an original signature done with a DocuSign if possible. So, what's the difference between those two? So the number one, you got to be careful, and you want to see, if possible, the original power of attorney. I will have to have the original because I have to register this on title to close. And the person who was appointed is the client. So if the son is appointed the power of attorney or the daughter, you identify that person completely. And you show the person who's in the home as the third party. You don't have to identify. You just show them as the third party. However, if you have a situation where you have two spouses who own a house and one spouse is giving the other power of attorney because they're going on a trip, I would still identify both of them. And the reason is because the spouse who's going on the trip is still going to probably approve the deal. However, wherever they are, they're going to give their permission for the deal. So my advice there is identify both of them, even though the person who gave it is not going to be here for the signature. And 99% of the time, if the power of attorney was prepared by a lawyer, it's good. Whenever and it has to have two witnesses. So whenever a power of attorney is not prepared by a lawyer, you should ask a question and you should send it. Like I have lots of times I tell agents, if it's not prepared by a lawyer, send me the power of attorney. Because if I'm acting for a seller and they're signing under power of attorney, I know that the title insurance company of the buyer is going to make me fill out a 5-page questionnaire before they allow the deal to close, because too many instances of fraud happen when people get these fraudulent powers of attorney and then they change title on properties and steal properties. That's why lawyers hate powers of attorney. So many times, if a power of attorney is not done by a lawyer, then they're going to ask me, how did you know this power of attorney was legitimate? And then I've got to do some research. I've got to find the family lawyer and say, this power of attorney was prepared. Do you recognize the witnesses? Like, I have to do this because I'm going to have to prove to the title insurance company that this was legitimate and they'll let the deal close. This is one of the reasons why I hate powers of attorney. And I say, sign the papers up before you leave, because I don't want to have to deal with the title insurance company of the buyer. So always remember that if you're doing a power of attorney, see if it was prepared by a lawyer. If it was prepared by a lawyer, 99% of the time your deal is going through. Just identify the person who's appointed as the attorney. Estates. So many of you may act for somebody who's passed away. And so when you pass away, hopefully you have a will that appoints a trustee, and the trustee is given the authority to carry out the wishes of the person who passed away. The trustee is your client. So if it's two trustees, and I had a situation recently where the agent got the trustee to sign the agreement, and the deal was sent to me in a rush to close, and then I said, send me the will. And it turned out that there were two trustees. And it said they both had to sign. So I said, you didn't get the other trustee to sign the agreement. Now, thankfully, we were able to find the other trustee, and we got all the closing papers at least signed by both of them. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to close the deal. And so very important, check, is it one trustee or both that have to sign? I've had some situations where there were 4 trustees and all 4 had to sign. You can imagine the running around to get signatures. So check that. Who signs? And identify the trustee. And the deceased is shown as the third party. And that's how you do that. Now, in most cases, you need the will and probate. Probate is the court process where they bless the will. And so it takes about 3 to 4 months. But in most of the cases, you do need probate in order to sell the property if somebody's passed away. There are some exceptions where you do not need probate. You just have to check on title. If you ever have this question, you could just send it to me. It would mean I would have to do a search, but if I did a search of title on any property, it would take me 5 minutes to let you know if you needed probate or not. Most of the time, you will need probate. And so, remember, that's 3 to 4 months. So you may have to have extension clauses in your agreement. You may think about getting probate first, then listing the property. But the key thing is, for Fintrac, identify the trustee. More than one trustee, you identify both. Yes?
What will happen if there is no will?
If there's no will, good question. If there's no will, there's a process where somebody has to be appointed as a trustee. And so what happens there is the closest relative has to go to court to make an application to say to a judge, make me the trustee, and I'll distribute the money. And that's not easy. So it has to be a very close relative. Sometimes you have to get insurance to stop somebody from stealing the money. And then the government actually has laws as to how the money gets split. So when somebody dies without a will in Ontario today, their spouse, if alive, gets the first $200,000. The rest of the money is split between the spouse and the children who are living. If there's no spouse, it goes to the children. No children, it goes to the parents. No parents, it goes to the brothers and sisters. No brothers and sisters, it goes to nieces and nephews. No nieces and nephews, government. That's how it works. So that's the way it works. Good idea to make a will so you don't have to deal with this, but the time period to get appointed is about 6 to 8 months. For somebody to go to court, get approved, to become a trustee, it's going to take longer, so that house is going to take longer. Question, yes?
What's the situation when it can be sold without probate?
So to give you a quick answer, any condominium in Ontario or any house that's on a subdivision, you know it's a subdivision if the plan has an M in it, letter M, then you must always get probate. There's no exception. But if you have properties from the old registry system, and there's about 50% of properties that used to be in the registry system, and they got moved into land titles between 93 and 2001. So let's say, and a lot of properties hit that category. So let's say you have a property that was in the old registry system, and it was moved into land titles in the year 2000, okay? So now we have somebody who owns that property who passed away. If that person who passed away bought that property before it was moved into land titles, which in this example is before 2000, so they bought it in 97, 96, 95, that property can be sold without probate. But if they bought the property in 2002, which means after it went into land titles, then you need probate. So I tell people typically, if you have an old bungalow that was not on a subdivision and the family of the deceased bought it at least 20, 25 years ago, you have a good chance there's no probate. But I would have to look at the title, and it takes me literally 2-3 minutes once I see it I can tell whether probate applies or not. But if you're not sure, that is an exercise worth conducting, because you can save the estate thousands of dollars and time if they don't have to get probate. Okay, so, and you know, I did it just last week. I saw a property that was registered in 2002, and the family bought the property in 1991, and I told them straight out, you don't need probate. You can just sell the property. So that's the exercise, but somebody has to check the title. Okay, so I've given you some of the tips about what is suspicious. And so this is a bit of a review of what we did. So cash deposits, but frankly, to me, every bank draft is suspicious. The client is not here in person. They changed the name of the buyer at the last minute. Again, you've got to identify the other person. Multiple deposits, assignments. I don't know if any of you do assignments, but the government is targeting assignments as a real problem, so always be nervous about assignments. When you act for somebody who's overseas, again, use a notary or lawyer to identify them for you. And really, again, their money doesn't seem to add up for what they're doing. Their job doesn't seem to make any sense for the money they have available. That inspection question where somebody has a condition on home inspection, just because somebody doesn't go through the deal doesn't mean it's money laundering. I'm just saying it's one of the factors to look at. They don't want to give you ID in person. And then how did they find you? I come back to the very first question. Okay, so that ends the Fintrac discussion this morning. How many of you found that helpful? Okay, so I wanted to sort of beg your pardon for the next few minutes. There were a few other topics I wanted to touch on, and then I'll take questions from you. So on your tables, I left a little handout. And so the first is for residential tenancies. I did want to explain to you the new rent control rule. So as there's a one-page handout. I don't know if I had enough for everybody, but it's on every table. So here's the key. Any property that was never used or rented as residential.
Sorry, Mark. We didn't have enough handouts, so I'm going to send an email so everybody has a copy after, so just share whatever is on
Yeah,
the
just
table.
share it. You'll see it on here. You can take a picture. So here's the point. Any new residential unit created November 15th last year or later is outside rent review. So anybody who buys a brand new unit from a builder this year and they rent it to a tenant, a year from now, they can raise the rent whatever they want. 10, 20, 30%. So let me give you another example. Let's say you have a bungalow that's been around for 30 years. It was never rented, and it's rented for the first time this year. Rent review will apply because it was a bungalow, it was a residential home. So you're stuck with 1.8%. But let's say you act for somebody this year who buys that bungalow, and that person decides to create a legal basement apartment that was never rented as a basement apartment before. The basement apartment is outside rent review. Same rule. So the house itself is caught, but not the basement. If you rent that basement for $1,000, next year you can raise it $1,100, $1,200, $1,300. Important for you to know. Now, how many of you act for tenants? Okay, a lot of you act for tenants. So how do you think your tenant's going to feel about you if in a year they come to you and say, you know that apartment you rented to me for $2,000? The landlord's raising the rent to $2,500. And my lawyer's telling me that's legal. Why the hell didn't you protect me? So you have to be able to protect a tenant. And so what I've done is I've also given you this clause. So if you want to take a picture or the clause, Ilana's going to send this to you. This comes from my new landlord guide anyways. But so you see, if you're acting for a tenant in a new unit, this is the clause you have to have. The landlord and tenant agree the maximum rent increase shall not be greater than, you can put a number, 2%, 3%. But this would stop the landlord from raising it to 10, 20, 30% next year. So let's say you're acting for a tenant, brand new unit, and you put this clause in. And the landlord agent says, sorry, we're taking it out. Why are they taking it out? Because the landlord wants the right to raise the rent more next year. At least the tenant knows it. And they can't blame you for this in a year. Do you understand? I had a lot of agents who were blamed when this used to be legal. But then after 2017, the government said that every property is under rent control. So this just happened at the end of last year. Do you find this slide helpful? Okay, if you have any questions, you can come and see me. You can send me an email. Any residential question, everything is covered in my landlord guide if you want to pick it up afterwards. Okay, now murder-suicides. We talked about this a little bit. Under the law today, a seller does not have to disclose any murder, suicide, even the Sherman case. If a buyer didn't know, it did not have to be disclosed by the family. So suicide, murder, shooting, natural death, the law in Canada today is non-disclosure. So how do you protect a buyer? You put a clause like this into the agreement. This is why I gave you this. It's on that piece of paper, but Alana is going to send this out. So this is a little taste of my cannabis seminar. I cover this in more detail.
Also included in our basic clauses if you have reception type of bar offers for like a basic sale. So
Oh, it's there?
Yeah,
I think
That the
Alana
cannabis
took
clause.
it from my last
I did, yeah.
cannabis. So you have this. How many think this is helpful? Use it. Because if this clause is there and the seller lies, well, then they can be sued after closing. But now the seller has to tell the truth. And the other clause is because of cannabis, everybody's worried about cannabis turning into mold. And the question is, does the seller have to disclose that? The seller only has to disclose it if they know there is mold behind the walls. 90% of sellers will never test for mold. So they can honestly say, even if they were growing a cannabis plant, we didn't know there was mold, so we don't have to disclose. To protect your buyer this year, I've given you as well, did you include this as well?
I did.
Okay, so this is now in your clauses. Alana was listening carefully when I did my first cannabis course, but you have this. And to me, this is how you protect your buyers. Now sellers have to tell the truth whether cannabis plants were grown, and if they were grown, you call in an inspector, you have a test done, sent to a lab, and you can prove to the buyer there was no mold in the room wherever they were growing plants. That's how you protect a buyer this year. Did you find that helpful to you? Okay, you're welcome. I just wanted to give that to you a little bit of a taste. And so I think I finished in time. Are there questions now from anybody about Fintrac? So before you leave, just a couple of housekeeping. If anybody is not on my email list, how many of you are on my email list? If you want to be on my email list, just bring me a business card over here afterwards. And if anybody wants to pick up a guide, they're just $20, or you can put it on your debit if you have no money, and I can give you one of my landlord guides. So otherwise, are there any questions anybody has? Shh. Any questions? Otherwise, yeah, well, Ilana, do you want to give them the microphone?
Yeah, anybody else?
And we'll take a few questions, and then if anybody has any extra questions, I'm going to stick around and I'll answer questions. So, do you want to give her the mic?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Nice to see you again. Yes.
Hi, just a quick question. You had some figures with respect to a person dying intestate. Was it the first 200,000 goes to the spouse?
I was going to say the first 200,000 goes to the wife,
Oh, okay.
because the wife usually outlives the husband. So I was going to say the first 200,000 goes to the wife, but it's to the spouse, yes.
Okay, and the balance goes to the children?
It's split between the spouse and the children alive. This is if there's no will.
Right.
If there's no will.
So if the house is worth $1 million, 200 goes to
To the spouse, and then the balance is split between the spouse and the kids.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay? Any other questions? And if you have a question over there in the back? Thank you for your patience.
Sorry, just a quick question about the bank draft. So is Fintrac going after the banks to be able to put that information in on the bank draft as to where the
It's a
funds
very
come
good question.
from?
That, not to my knowledge, is Fintrac requiring the banks on bank. Now, wouldn't that be great? If Fintrac said to the banks, you have to do that? That could be, that's a great suggestion. I don't know that if it's been made, wouldn't that be helpful? If the bank put the bank account information and the name on the bank draft? That's, what a great answer. That should be a question that's put to Fintrac, because they are starting, I think I read in the paper this morning, that they are starting to identify banks that don't do a proper job of reporting suspicious deals. So now they're starting to name banks, because they're part of the problem. That would be a terrific solution. Thank you. If I have a chance, I'm going to convey that to the folks at Fintrac. That would make everybody's life
We'll add that
a lot
to the long
easier.
list of things that we already have for them.
Yeah, that would make everybody's life a lot easier. Terrific. Any other questions?